Welcome to Difficult Conversation Africa broadcast, a pioneering platform which attempts to raise, discuss issues many are afraid to face. I present to you the host, Yinka Olaito, a media communications development expert, author with about 2 decades experience in Africa and in the United States.
Welcome to Difficult Conversation Africa podcast. My name is Inka Olaito. The Difficult Conversation Africa podcast is a platform through which we raise conversation that many are afraid to discuss. But such conversations are pivotal to both personal, corporate, and national development. In this episode, we'll be looking at data and national stroke organizational growth. How is data very vital in whatever we do as an individual. As usual, I will like to give you a background of this conversation before I introduce my guest. Data is valuable asset for businesses in the 21st century. Though data in its raw state may not be useful, looking at current trend in our world holistically, an important part of steering a successful organization or nation involves assembling data that can be analyzed to gain greater insight into the business and its customer base. We can also say customer performance or product performance. Many of the leading nations and companies across the globe had and have continuously leveraged data for business purposes. But beyond just gathering data, advances in areas such as data processing, data visualization, have shown the importance of data and have made reaping the benefit of big data more accessible to everyone. The challenge many have is that they do think they do not have data, but they do. The data generated is growing exponentially. Data is now extremely ready, available to businesses, business leaders, national leaders who are willing to extract them. There are also data-focused organizations today to help in collating and analyzing data for public good. In our Difficult Conversation podcast today, my guest is Joshua Olufemi. Joshua Olufemi is the founder of Dataphyte, a think tank dedicated to enhancing Nigeria's socio-economic development through data access, policy insight, and technology. Joshua has built a reputation as a leading voice in investigative journalism, data-driven storytelling, civic technology, shaping conversation around human rights and democratic accountability in sub-Saharan Africa. His work span multiple areas of governance and civil liberties with a particular focus on media freedom, digital rights, and election transparency. His experience position him as an expert in documenting and analyzing human rights trends, shedding light on state repression, voter suppression, and economic inequality that shape the lives of millions across the region. Over the years, Olufemi has tracked issues around human rights like digital harassment, misinformation, campaign, and systemic attempts to silence activists and journalists, and he had trained human rights defenders, journalists, civil society actors, and researchers on data-driven reporting, election monitoring, and digital security, ensuring that those working on the ground have the necessary resources to document and report human rights abuses effectively. His work bridges the gap between media technology and human rights advocacy, making him a key figure in conversation about democracy and press freedom in Africa. Mr. Olufemi, Joshua, please welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, sir, for having me.
All right. Thank you for always being there. Thank you for the great work you are doing. I'm very happy anniversary to Dataphyte that closed 5 years recently. We'll talk about that in the course of the conversation. So let's dive straight into the conversation. The importance of data is no longer in doubt. But why are there no necessary data available when we need it in Nigeria?
I think if I want to also answer very direct, I would say that it's the reason why every other social service or infrastructure is inadequate or unavailable when
Mm,
citizens, governments, and even businesses need them. And pretty much you can center that around four things or four challenges or four gaps or lack of purpose for various actors. First one is that as I think we've over time built a culture that undermines or undervalue, data systems or data policy. So from a policy point of view, I think we only have something on paper that has not even
mm,
been reviewed over time about how data should be collected,
mm,
processed, and used for
mm,
decision making. So at the point of that, you know, system design, system or policy framework that would drive data availability. I think this challenge of culture in terms of how we arrive at these services is a challenge. The second thing that's very close to it is that we also, even when we have policies that we can even experiment before we review, we also then really, or I would say we underfund the infrastructure to make them available or to make the
mm,
policy work, right? Um, it was yesterday I was having a conversation with a senior colleague, and he was talking about the fact that every from everyone who naturally has been in an employment, whether in or out of it, for whatever reason that has made you pass through an organization and have ever earned a dime, you should have your national insurance number or your PENCOM number, or you should have a tax identification number. Whether you're taxed or not, whether within or outside of the threshold, you should be able to do that. But what public infrastructure exists to ensure that that is default, right? That's the place where availability that should be driven by policy is also underfunded at the place of infrastructure. How much investment is government or even businesses putting into ensuring that they have the tools and the technology to harness data for development or other forms of decision making. The third challenge is also the challenge of the people dynamics. How do we center, systems and structures in a way that there are people to maintain or sustain the achievement of its objective? How much, is government ensuring that citizens, civil servants, civil society organizations, development organizations are well aware of their role and ensuring
mm,
that they incentivize the process of ensuring that they play their role in data provision, right? Why do I need to be forced to register for BVN or NIN if I already know intrinsically as a citizen that that determines all social service provision from government? So every
mm,
time government shuts down, economic activity, saying, "Oh, Nigerians should use the next 3, 4, 5 days. If you don't get your BVN, that's the end of it." And then we kept postponing and we keep postponing. And almost every other data collection process, usually citizen identification process, there's always either an economic shutdown, but the continuous mobilization, incentivization of citizens to see this as part of their civic responsibility or even a way of ensuring access to services is lacking. That's the
mm,
third challenge that I think continues to give us that lack of necessary data. Why should it be difficult for the same person who goes to school, who goes to a workplace, who understands, who will vote, or who would be concerned about activities within their own, not be, you know, intuitively measured to provide data to government? That means that there's a systemic gap between government of data publishers and data contributors. And the relationship that exists within them, I think, is like every other relationship that happens in government. And the last one is then even the what I always like to call the capacity or potentials of policymakers to be futuristic in planning. You can't want to plan as simple as your next rent without having to your next annual rent without having to plan by your salaries. So if you're planning the future, the need for immediate data becomes important.
Thank you for you've raised 4 points here. You are talking about policy, you are talking about infrastructure, you talk about funding, and the last one you are mentioning is really a concern to everyone. And I think that policymakers, government leaders, and everyone need to pay attention to this conversation. But the goal of every useful data is to turn data into information and turn information into useful insights. For the few available data, let's now talk about few available data now, because we have a measure, though it doesn't meet up. For the few available data, making sense of them is difficult for the average person. How can we bridge these challenges associated with data out there? Because, yeah, we know that we don't have the data. Now we have few. And um, most of these data are not useful for an average person. Why has that been difficult? And what are your thoughts and advice?
Uh, I guess the first thing is to always see data and its use, right, from the place of what in technology design we call human-centered design, right? And it's the same thing we say in journalism. I mean, the background that both of us share, you talk about human-centered storytelling or narrative,
Exactly.
right? And the simple way to sort of bridge the gap is to always ask the question, what is the value that the everyday citizen or Nigerian in this context would get from this data? Why is it important for me to register the birth of my child? Right?
As
Why
simple
is
as
it
that.
important? Why is it important for me to register the death of my parent or loved ones or family members? Why is it difficult? Why is it important for me to report change of address? And simple things. And using that to help people understand that population and demography and even internal migration can affect the entire resource allocation. And how do we? So it means people have to see value in the numbers. It's always easy. There's a joke that I mean we grew up knowing. It's a joke that we use to characterize, a section of Nigeria's ethnicity, where they say a little child was taken to school and didn't understand basic mathematics and was sent back home. And the father, of course, being a businessman, said, "Oh, how can you say my son doesn't know?" And they asked, he said to the teacher, "Tell the child the math again." And he says, 2 times 5. The child did not know it. And then the father asks his child, 2 container plus 2 container in 5 places. How many? The child said 10 container. And because the child has a lived experience of container, which is business for his father, he could do the mathematics rather than doing 2 times 5, which he has to do some kind of abstract cognitive reasoning. But when they brought it to the affective domain of his understanding, his lived experiences, he was able to connect it. And that leads me to what I say is one of the role and goal of Dataphyte is ensuring that data moves away from numbers to, connecting it to human, you know, realities. And that's what we talk about. How do you contextualize data in a storified, in a narrative based, and people
That people can relate with.
aha. The other is also ensuring that even in the time that data is being collected, it is co-created. If citizens are involved in and understand why you are collecting the data, the need and the use for the data becomes important. The need for it because businesses don't collect NYC certificate. They don't check whether their students graduate, their staff graduate from universities because they don't see the value in the fraud or that policy. such that they don't see that it is protecting them, not a government regulation, right? And some of these things are like, how do we ensure that in the design of data need or data use or the value chain of data, we're ensuring that we start to have data intermediaries. We start to ensure that there are also a large amount of digital public goods, which is more or less like, how do we create open source tools? How do we make sure that everybody can access data here and there, right? Why is it difficult for me to know how much my local government chairman made? Because there's also that whole conversation about how much data is available or is open. Is available, but is it open? Because when it is open, that's when you start to see the value in it. If I don't know how much has been budgeted for something in my area, I can ask questions, right? So
That's
how do we
true.
ensure that community members, and providing it in an inclusive way? I wanted to mention that. How do we ensure that people are not disenfranchised in the use and value of data just because of their level of education, their
Education
disability,
and
or
social.
even region?
Thank you. You said it much with so much within the few minutes, and I think that our viewers will need to listen to this over and over and again. Story, the data in a storytelling manner where people can actually relate, and I think that is even missing. Right? Every organization health rests on useful data. We cannot manage what we cannot measure. It's a popular mantra. We do know product consumer do not measure how hard an organization is trying. Same case for citizen. They don't measure government performance by how far they claim they are actually trying. But the quality of service delivery they get. Why has it been so difficult for many organizations and many nations to get this? And what will be your advice to policymakers and leaders?
I think the first thing is creating, like I started by saying, we don't have a culture, that provides policy infrastructure and,
Mm.
people-centered data collection. I think the first thing is to create a culture that helps people to see data as
The
not
need for
just
data.
an afterthought.
Okay.
When data is not an afterthought for people, it's easier for organizations, government to begin to, live a data-driven, life, right? First thing is, can we embed or can we ensure that even performance or KPIs are data backed?
Mm.
Don't tell a civil servant to just, collect certificates or ensure that people do something. Tell the civil servant you have to collect 10,000 records in the space of 30 days or 60 days or 90
For
days.
this
Now, when
purpose.
the 60, 90 days comes and it is not up to 10,000, it becomes a reason for review or
Mm.
assessment and change. So you have to sort of create data-driven, assessment or performance measures so that everybody starts to see the value of data, right?
Mm.
Just because the price of electricity increased in Nigeria, everybody started to know the amount that a unit of energy is in Nigeria.
Energy cost.
That's because now the price has now been is now it has now become everybody is now literate about it, because before now what we used to have is they will just send us a bulk random figure and we leave it,
Random figure.
right? But because they have now tied it into unit by unit pricing, everybody became literate intrinsically.
And
So,
aware.
so how do we ensure that we create tools and instruments within systems that ensures data-driven accountability, data-driven, you know, uh, 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 um, people also. How do we ensure that we don't just have people who collect data, we have people who also translate the information in the data. Now that we have all been paying for electricity now, how much does it translate to in revenue for government? How is it impacting the life of citizens? You have now charged me 50,000 naira for being in band A, but my salary is just 70,000. So you have already taken over 60 to 70% of my income on just energy. Who is
Just
translating the
anything else.
numbers, into meaning, right? And how do we ensure that those unnecessary metrics, we are not even using them in the conversation? Oh,
Mm.
Nigeria has increased its GDP by Kinikon. Oh, there's inflation, as we will rebase GDP, but you cannot rebase suffering. You can't rebase the lived reality of people, livelihood, but you can rebase the national income values or numbers. So stop.
Exactly.
Aha.
So it's really a whole gamut of issues that many are not even aware of, even the policymaker, those in government. Why is it changes happening? For what purpose? These are questions that I think we should be asking when it comes to data. For the electricity thing that you mentioned, band A, band B, and all that, we rather not go there today doing the analysis, but I think it's also a vital point that people need to know. How we asking questions? Yes, today it is better that you know what you are using, unlike before that they just randomly give you a figure. But at the same time, you rebase the economy without rebase the suffering of the masses. I like that phrase, and I think I will take it away. So, for data to be reliable, there should be strong evidence of reliability and transparency. We seem to see some report published by some development organization tactically promoted to achieve predetermined narrative. How can the public know the difference? How can an ordinary person distinguish which data is worth extracting and which is not, since so much is being produced? I remember I cite an instance. One of our training, one of your staff was there and he was analyzing something and said that there seemed to be error in this report, but it was pushed out by International Development Agency. How do we now? So my question around that area is, how will people know which data to actually the reliability of data? These are questions that is in my mind in this area. Um, those who have data that are predetermined to strengthen a narrative of their own, and this occurs. What can we do? And as a data company, have you had that challenge? And what is your advice to the people and to everyone?
I mean, we face the challenge every day. I mean, just talking from Dataphyte's point of view, and it's one of the reasons why our journalists or our analysts always say that we torture them about provenance, but they
Mm.
also torture the data to get the value out of it. And what that means is almost every data, even the ones that we get from official sources, when we go down to, when we deep dive into the methodology or even the raw data set, we start to see the gaps. And I always have this joke that I say to the analysts in the room, especially the statisticians, the mathematicians, the economists in my office. I say, I think the best way to ensure that you are safe is to talk to a journalist. And they say, what do you mean? I say, because the element of journalism tells us some of these things. Journalism teaches us provenance. You need to know the motive. You need to
Mm.
understand who gave the information. How was the information? We talk about source, knowing the motive of the source of your information. So
And the
it's the
why.
same thing for and the why. So the data that you have in front of you, why was the data collected? Who produced the data? Who funded or who provided the finance for
Mm.
the data? And why are they collecting the data? That's the first question you need to ask. We need to be as critical of the data even before we use it. It's like what we say in media information literacy. Don't just say take something because even the person that sent it to you, why did the person decide to send it to you or to a WhatsApp group? The same thing is
Mm.
also a question of if you cannot see the methodology that is used to produce the data that you are quoting, you probably need
Mm.
to think twice before you join the bandwagon of people who are using the data. We all, well, that's how we always find out this fault. We've seen a very respected, development organization funded project that was reported by a big media organization in the UK. And when we looked at the data, we've done it like 2, 3 times. We faulted it, right? We didn't want to call it a fact checking, but we actually called them out and said this data is because for us, as soon as we saw the raw data set, we're able to tell. Another thing that we talk about in journalism is we talk about balance. Don't hear what one source say. You hear
Mm.
another source. Is the same. You can apply the same thing, which is ensure that you triangulate the data. Okay, source A gave me this data. How is this data, related or ranked with other data sets that are available? I was watching a video recently how that the average life expectancy of Africans have been miscalculated. And
Really?
how the person looked at it was just to see that there is a high correlation between what is used for our life expectancy and our infant mortality figures, which probably suggested that infant mortality was used to calculate our life expectancy.
And these are different things.
And these are two different data sets that, when triangulated, it gave a new meaning that then makes it easier for people to now question and not just, be purveyor of propaganda-driven data. And then the last one is also the one that we have also, continued to do at Dataphyte, is create a community of practice of data watchdogs. People who their job is not just to use data to tell stories, their job is not just to use data to hold government to account, but their job is to also look within the data and see if there is anything LD, in using your word now, unhealthy about the data that we're even using for storytelling.
Yeah, thank you. What you have just said raised the issue for me and for our team, the necessity of data literacy. Data literacy is very important today. What would be your personal guide to individual, corporate, and national data literacy techniques or guide? Since we now know that there are predetermined narrative in some of these, or using work condition, like you have said, that they use infant mortality to calculate life expectancy. So there's a gap of data literacy, and there should be more people to be able to challenge. But because of lack of data literacy, we can't do that. So, what would be your guide to an individual, to organization, to nation, and whatever, in terms of data literacy? Data literacy.
I always say the general adage that says practice makes perfect, but makes perfect, right? You get better at it as you practice it. So the first thing is get interested in data, and it doesn't have to be large volume of data before you start to get interested in, and which was why I used the example of electricity bill, right? As simple as just looking at the simple data that affect our everyday life. It's how we start. Paying attention to when we see charts, when we see graphs, when we see maps, paying attention and asking questions about them is a way to start to build the literacy. What you see is what you interrogate. What you hear is what you can process, right? So I think it's more of people building interest in asking the questions behind every data they hear. Oh, Nigerians are 200 million people. How are we distributed
How did
across the
you
state?
achieve that?
That's it. Was it, how are we distributed across the state? When you know how we are distributed across the state, you will not pander to the conversation around, oh, people who are not producing oil are the ones that are getting more fat, right? Because you would then know that, oh, you would then ask the question of what is the formula for fat distribution? Oh, population plays a high, as a matter of fact, is the biggest factor in fat distribution, right? And if Kano has more people but has no crude oil, right, it probably will get more than a small oil producing state by population. And all of this, and also knowing that, okay, even the fact itself, it's not just the oil money, there is other forms of revenue that are used to make. So paying attention to every data that we talk about, that we see, asking further questions about those data is how you build literacy. You sort of build it just
Thank,
by interrogating more and more, and then of
thank,
course build the capacity, pay attention to the use of data
thank
processing
you
tools like
very much.
Excel.
I think
Pay attention as why I fight that thing. Because of our time, I just go to the last two questions straight. How can individual and corporate organization and nation scale artificial intelligence data integration challenges? Because that's also a challenge for many people.
I always like to use a very good example. I say artificial intelligence eats data for breakfast.
Mm.
But the thing about data is just like food. If you use the wrong ingredient, you will get a wrong taste. You
Mm.
so it means that the first thing to start with is coming back from where we are, what data as individuals, as companies, or corporate, or as government, what data do we even have today? Can we even know the data that we have? Can we also identify the data gaps that we have? Can we also start to do what is now a common term, which is called data interoperability? How do we ensure that data speaks to each other, right?
Mm.
How do we ensure that the data that is collected in a primary healthcare center in one remote area in Nigeria connects to the data of the Ministry of Health at the federal level? How do we ensure that not only is health data speaking, employment data is speaking, identity number is speaking, payment, data is that data interoperability. And at organizational level, it means ensuring that all the data that you have of your personnel, the data that you have of your sales, the data that you have of your process, even your data your website analytics, all of this data, you are bringing them together on dashboards. I think one simple thing I say to organizations is start to create dashboard for every data that you have.
Okay.
Now everybody's talking about FAQ. It becomes easier, which was why we created the FAQ dashboard. It's easier to have a more robust conversation about FAQ if we created a dashboard. That dashboard
Mm.
is not enough when you just tell us how many states got what. Tell us what is the land mass, tell us what is the population, tell us the FAQ per capita of each state, so that when you see the FAQ per capita of Kano versus FAQ per capita of Rivers State, you will know that truly, even though in volume, Kano seem to have more, in all fairness, per capita, Rivers probably has more. Some of these things are things that dashboard show because you are now connecting not just a fact data, you are making it interoperable with population, land mass, weather, and all of those other formulas that are used. So it's all, I think that's the way to go about. And then the third one is incentivize the people. An organization
Mm.
that does not create a culture in its people to love data, right? Is an
Okay.
organization that or a government institution whose staff don't even understand the value of time, right? So if the staff comes in, it takes the first 1 hour to go and talk and play, or uses the first 1 hour to start a prayer warrior session in the MDA. So, but if the person knows the value of every minute, that in every minute, these are the number of people that dies, these are the number, and if you are not doing your job for every minute, that's 60 minutes that you have now used to call the angels down. Are they going to be carrying people who are dead in the hospitals, or are they going to be using it to give money?
I'm sure that this is a conversation that we need to have again and again, but because we have limited time, let's just go straight to the last question. Now, your organization, Dataphyte, just clocked 5 years. What are the milestones you are very proud of, and where does the future lie?
Right. I think I always say that the first milestone is the number of people that we've been able to take from being data rookies to data, champions. You know,
Okay.
it's the investment that we've made in the people. When we started, we said we wanted to create a community of practice of people who starts to see value in data, who talk data every other day, who every time they even talk about all the other issues that we public discourse, they take it from a place of data. I think that's the first milestone that will produce over internally, we produce over 50 people who have worked with us one way or the other, who are now data champions, who have built skills, data literate, data analysts, data scientists, and even technologies who have built platforms. That's one. Now, in terms of the people that we have also impacted, organizations that we have also partnered with or supported, I think that's another great thing that we've achieved. Now, one that we always celebrate is our predictive uh, 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 you know,
Capability.
capability, predictive science, predictive journalism that we've deployed from the predicting when COVID and the amount of people that will have been impacted by COVID in Nigeria by the third month, by predicting how the election will be won by numbers, and we were quite accurate. To being able to even go on the ground to use citizens, data science, to fact check even official data sets about livelihood and food prices. I think that those are like things that made
This
us
is
even
a
say that.
quite impressive milestone. What
Yeah,
does the future? Where does the future lie?
that's what I'm trying to connect. What we've seen is that our future is in predictive and prescriptive data and and technology. That's what we are centering on. And that's why if you probably have followed our work, we said we're moving from just being a journalism organization into becoming a think tank, where we are now developing, data models. We're developing socioeconomic metrics and measurement to, improve, influence, policies across the country. We're also looking into a future where in another 5 to 10 years, Dataphyte will have produced not just 50 or 1,000 people, but will have lived up to having over 500,000 people who have been part of our process, but have also learned data analysis, data science, in organizations, in government, and among citizens. That's another milestone that we're giving ourselves. The other is also to ensure that we use the resources of AI, to improve and to scale the value of socioeconomic development in Nigeria, but across the continent. That's another thing we are going after. And then the last, which is what our technology called Go Local is about, is to, give power back to citizens in contributing data that will drive development in Nigeria.
Yeah, Mr. Femi, Joshua, thank you very much. I'm excited that young men like you, young people like you are doing great work and very focused and determined, bringing the changes that we actually look forward to. I wish Dataphyte and everyone, especially you and the team, the best of the years ahead, and we hope that you can contribute more and more. For our listeners, I think that this is one of the conversation that I would like that we do a second episode, and we'll call Femi Joshua to actually add to this. But for now, to policymakers, to governments, and everyone, I think that listening to this should challenge you to be a better person. And I'm sure that DataByte is always there to assist if you need any form of support in this area. We have had collaboration with them in one of the organizations where they help help us to train journalists and all that. So for our listener, thank you for listening. Thank you for always being there for us. I'll see you in the next episode. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to also follow the project website, which is www.difficultconversationafrica.org. See you and thank you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this episode. For inquiry, please send an email to info@difficultconversationafrica.org. Telephone 0809 591. Please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Difficult Conversation Africa. See you soon.